next Devo in the series of great joys called Unrelenting Pain. And I guess this particular one that I studied has affected me the most personally so far. You know the book of Job. It might be my favorite book in the Bible because we can all relate. No, hardly any of us have ever lost anything and everybody and all of our health at once. But we feel and we empathize with this guy that does, and we look to his story to find faith in ours when the pain just won't stop. So Job starts out by saying that his anguish and misery is so heavy that surely God sent arrows and terrors against him. Sometimes we're just sure that God's totally against us because so many bad things happen. No prayers are seemingly answered. So it must be that God is setting up a battle against us. Next we read that Job begs God to just cut off his life and so he can be done with the pain. And in verse 10 he says if God would do that, at least Job would have joy in unrelenting pain and knowing he did not deny the words of the Holy One. In other words, so far he hadn't given up on God or denied him or cursed him, so he'd rather die knowing he'd been faithful, so that would be his final joy. What were the words of the Holy One he's talking about? Well, we read back in chapter 1 that God said this about Job in his discourse with Satan. Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless, upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. God wasn't against Job, but there was an enemy that was, and after the enemy took all that Job had, it says that Job never charged God with wrongdoing. But now in chapter 6, the only wrongdoing Job is charging God with is that God is against him. He must be. He's sending arrows and terrors to destroy him. I stood by a friend when she lost her husband, and she said she was confronted with questions like, did God take her husband? Did her husband do something that caused him to prematurely die? Did the enemy take her husband out? And the only conclusion she could come to that brought solace and peace was that God was in control and it was her husband's time to go. That enabled her to go on. The truth that God was the one that holds our days and the one that enables us to move on. In verse 11, Job confesses he has no strength, no power to help himself, and nothing to help him to be patient in his misery. And then, oddly enough, comes this whole section about being a kind friend. In verse 14, Job says, if anyone withholds kindness from a friend, he's forsaken the Almighty. That's a big statement. But Job's friends have been totally undependable and intermittent as a stream, it says. They've been no help to him. And in the next chapter, Job turns back to God, and Job just says he's never going to see happiness again. All his sources of joy have waned and disappeared in the form of friends and even in God himself. He despises his life because it has no meaning. All success and purpose and health have been exited from him. And he even questions why he was born. He accuses God of destroying his hope. Big accusations. When our prayers go unanswered and disappointment and pain are too much to bear, why are we even here, sometimes we think? Why has disappointment been so much a part of our life? And Job even cries out and says, I cry to you, God, but you don't answer. I'm standing here, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand, you've attacked me. The entire book of Job is about all these friends trying to comfort him in his distress without success, and they just disappoint him. I'd like to propose that disappointment is what zaps our joy. Disappointment in what we thought about God, about friends, and even ourselves. And in disappointment, we lose sight of who God is, even to the point of accusing him of forsaking us. And of course, then in chapter 38, we hear God respond to Job to brace himself like a man and listen up. He says one who contends with the Almighty is going to dare to correct him. And in his reply, God reminds Job of who he is, the creator and the sustainer of all living things, and Job is not. To believe that God has gone against his own image that he's created us and set out arrows and terrors to destroy us is an affront to God. And Job responded well by saying, I spoke of things I didn't understand, things too wonderful to know. And then he prayed for those disappointing friends. And in the end it says Job died full of years, and dare we say full of joy. Disappointment in who we think God is, determined by others and our set of circumstances, is the biggest and perhaps the only thing that robs us of joy. Joy is choosing to believe that God is for us in unrelenting pain always. He never sets evil in our path. In fact, He's the deliverer to us from the evil one. If we've lost our joy or constantly lose our joy and then flounder to regain it again through worship and in things we do and in people, we need to know that there's no greater sustaining joy than knowing that God loves us in our unrelenting pain. He's aware and He cares and He has a plan to restore, and that is the truth. Truth about who God is equals joy, and disappointment has to go.